Conference on corporate social responsibility, expectations, reality, and challenges is scheduled to begin today. Corporate social responsibility (CSR), also called corporate consciousness, is a form of corporate self-regulation integrated into a business model. CSR policy functions as a built-in self-regulating mechanism whereby a business monitors and ensures its active compliance with the spirit of the law, ethical standards, and international norms. I feel sense of pride and satisfaction to share that we at Ashland and Company are in practice of the above mentioned values. Fortunately, this year we are also celebrating Platinum Year of Ashland and Company, a big publishing house in India. I wish and hope that the 2-day-long deliberation in the form of research papers and discussions in the conference would contain the knowledge on the subject and would be of immense benefit to one and all. I wish this conference a great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very kind and generous invitation and welcome. I've been told that I've been moved up from special guest to chief guest, so I'm special and chief. I think my mother will be very, very proud of that great honor, so thank you very, very much. As already you've noticed, I do tend to talk rather a lot. I've been advised that I can take a little bit more time than originally planned. So it's now 11:15. I'll try and speak for about 25 minutes, if that's okay with the host. Or is that too long?
No, it's okay.
One thing as a speaker at many conferences, and my colleagues here know, is that we can say lots of things in 1 minute, 2 minutes, and 30 minutes. But we do realize after 30 minutes the attention does tend to wander. The other thing I'm going to do is to use PowerPoint slides. Now I know it's very difficult to listen and to look at exactly the same time, especially in perhaps not your first language. I've been working in the field of corporate social responsibility for 20 years, I discovered. When I was met at the airport, thank you very much, by Dr. Aditya Tripathi, sitting over there, and his wonderful colleague who's been looking after me, Dr. Monish, who's hidden somewhere over there. But I'd also like to thank other guests, Madam Savita, Dr. Malik, and other friends and colleagues. And I'm also delighted to speak to 4 students since I've been here and in this very room. And I'm so impressed with the quality of the students that you have, just on the sample of 4. Totally at random, I'm sure, but I see also their ushers, so I think perhaps not quite at random. But it was a great pleasure to have a little chat with you. Before I got into corporate social responsibility, I worked for the International Labour Organization in Geneva, the ILO. And I got into that because I started off life as a mathematician, a pure mathematician. Found out I wasn't very good at that. Saw the beauty of mathematics at a glimpse and I thought, this is too hard for me. So I became a statistician. I like that. I like probability theory, and my master's thesis was in probability theory. Very good if you go into casinos, by the way. And I've actually been quite successful in casinos, but it's very boring being in a casino. The casino of life is the most interesting of all. So, but because of that, after statistics, I became an economist. And as everybody knows, economics is what economists do. So I'm proud to be an economist. I do economics. I think CSR is economics. I'll continue. So I'm going to cover the following 5 points, talking about corporate social responsibility and sustainable development. And it looks like I've got an old presentation here. I don't know how that title crept in. As always, authors know errors creep in. So I wonder here, I've got one of my older presentations here. Just go again. Doesn't it always happen when you get to the podium? And I'm not the first, so you've seen the whole presentation. Any questions? Considering I worked for IBM in the computer industry once, you can see that even specialists in computer technology make mistakes on these computers, and I'm sure we all do that. The thesis that's interested me in recent years is that CSR is both accelerating and fragmenting. I'm not going to read my slides out. I'm sure the organizers will make these available afterwards. But what's been interesting in my journey on corporate social responsibility has been how the wording changes over time and how the focus changes. And I'm hoping I've got a slide here. I don't think it made it. Oh, that slide didn't make this version. Sorry. I'm not quite sure what happened. I'm so sorry. It was my fault, not the organisers. I gave them, I'm sure, the wrong one. What I was going to show was a slide that I did only last night on 3 concepts. One, CSR, corporate social responsibility. The second was sustainability. And the third was the phrase social responsibility itself. And I've been doing this over the years to actually try and trace a little bit the evolution of these concepts, because they're quite slippery, as all concepts can be when they're relatively new. Using Google, I found out that corporate social responsibility is now edged out sustainability. It came up with, I think, around 60 million hits, whereas sustainability was about 45 million. You can check these yourself using Google. It's a very rough and ready analysis, as you know. I was quite interested to see that social responsibility came up at around 190 million hits. So, dear oh dear. One problem with the issue of sustainability is that it tends to look into the long-term future, and we get attractive pictures like this one of polar bears clinging to ice floes, which are melting. Ice floes always melt. So is this trick photography? In fact, I found out later that it was. But this has certainly captured people's imagination in terms of the whole issue of global warming and climate change, which is certainly a part of the issue that CSR covers. It also covers catastrophes such as this, and we see this in our newspapers on a daily basis, pictures of poverty and famine, pictures from Syria right now and right across the world. And it's very distressing, and let's face it, we do tend to look away from it. But these are still the issues of our time. And when people talk about sustainability and the definition of sustainability, which is caring for future generations without satisfying the welfare of the present, I sometimes think that's a little bit of income distribution from the present to the future. And it worries me a little bit, because still half the people on our planet are living in poverty, in abject poverty. As you know very well, I know it's a huge issue in India, and some of the best work on issues of poverty has been done in India. And you are making strides, as you know, but the problem is still there. CSR, to me, should be addressing this issue as much as others as well. I'm just going to put up my own definition. On the car coming here today, one of my drivers was saying that if everybody gives their own definition before they start their own seminar, this conference could take a week. So I just want to highlight a few definitions here and a few aspects of corporate social responsibility. That corporate social responsibility is concerned, as we heard from the first speaker, with treating the stakeholders of a company or institution ethically or in a responsible manner. Now, I'm not going to go into defining ethically, although I did have the occasion 2 days ago to meet a chap who talked about this 2,300 years ago. His name was Aristotle. And I was at his place marked for his funeral in Chalkis in Greece a few days ago, and found out that many of his sayings, many of his writings, fit quite appropriately into CSR of today. So CSR is not particularly new. There is a history of CSR, and in fact good companies historically have always had aspects of CSR. The second point I make is that social includes economic and environmental responsibility, and that stakeholders exist both within a firm and outside. This definition comes from a lot of work done by the essentially US academic establishment, such as Donna Wood and Archie Carroll and Ed Freeman and so on. And I've been a great student of their work, and I can proud to say that many of them are now friends of mine. But their work never really ventured out very much into companies. They never really applied their ideas to companies. So the work was a little bit sterile, quite hard, as Donna Wood would mention herself, to read some of her articles. Donna Wood is kind to me and says that I was one of the first to apply these ideas to companies, and that was my first book, called the Planetary Bargain. And there are many, many better books since then, but that was the first, I think, to do that. Now, that led me to teaching as well. I was teaching corporate social responsibility the last 6 years at the University of Geneva in Switzerland. And as all teachers know, we don't know. And we learn from our students and with our students. And I'm really happy to say that my definition, which has found its way into definitions as far away as the Global Reporting Initiative, ISO 26000 and so on. You might ask how. Well, some of my colleagues and students worked on those august bodies. And I also asked the same question. I'm not comparing myself in any way to such luminaries as Aristotle, but this chap lived 2,300 years ago. No social media, no books. How on earth did he get his message out? Nice PhD thesis for somebody. I'd be very interested in that. Our message gets out in all sorts of ways, and I said through our students. And one student listening to me one day made my definition, and then I was followed by the head of corporate social responsibility from Intel, who explained what Intel was doing on corporate social responsibility. And he used so many definitions: sustainability, corporate citizenship, the sustainable corporation, the ethical corporation. We've all seen some of that. And she went away thoroughly confused, and she came back the following day. So a student, her name is Nadine Hauer. I was fortunate because Nadine is also a journalist and works, and still does, for the Discovery Channel. And she said to me, you know, Michael, I think, thinking about it, and I've adopted her thoughts since then, that corporate social responsibility is the process, and sustainable development is the goal. I used to call that creating higher and higher standards of living. So neatly, we link corporate social responsibility with sustainability. I hope that helps a little bit. I don't want to spend too much time discussing definitions, nor going into other definitions. Probably the one that's closest to mine, or should I say the other way around, mine is now closer to ISO 26000 than perhaps the EU definition and others that are being used, is the one of ISO 26000. The problem with ISO 26000, as you know, it's a standard and it's not a standard. And to get hold of it, you have to pay quite expensively for a copy of it, which is not quite the idea I would have on CSR. And on my own website, you can find lots of writings which are all free of charge. Since as a promoter, as a student, as an academic and a businessman, I believe that lots of things have to be put on the market as free. I do have an online course on corporate social responsibility, which I charge for. Since I started doing that, something called MOOC, M-O-O-C, I don't know if you've come across that, has come across, which is online education for free, online. And you can get qualifications for it. So even though I'm selling my own, I kind of welcome the competition coming from Harvard and Stanford and the rest of it. They're not quite as good, but they're coming along. Let me just show you a typical stakeholder map, which was done by the CEO of the Novartis Foundation. Novartis is a big pharmaceutical company based in Switzerland. And there you see some of the stakeholders which are considered of importance. There's a whole literature on stakeholder dialogue and stakeholder analysis led by Ed Freeman, which I'm sure many of you know. And there are models by Mitchell and Wood which allow you to choose stakeholders and your key stakeholders. It's quite an interesting part of corporate social responsibility. And I'll give you an example of the sorts of key stakeholders that came up for the Novartis Foundation. So you see that shareholders are a stakeholder. So it's not stakeholders and shareholders, but it's shareholders are a key stakeholder. Something also interesting about stakeholders is a combination between them, which happened with the Brent Spar incident of Shell many years ago when Shell were trying to bury an oil rig in the North Sea. Greenpeace said, oh, no, you can't do that. That'll pollute the North Sea. We can't have that. So Shell brought back their oil rig and found out that they've been subject to stakeholder pressure from the NGOs and from the media, so a combination of two stakeholders. Well, the story, that was quite an important story in terms of the development of corporate social responsibility. What happened when they started to think about how best to dispose of this oil rig, they found out the best thing to do was dispose of it in the North Sea. You can also use stakeholder theory in institutions. I've used it to apply it to the World Cup and to the Olympics. Is the Olympics a social responsibility phenomenon? Is a question. And it's particularly appropriate as Sochi Olympics in Russia is starting in the next day or so. I use the theory of stakeholder for the Westgate massacre in Nairobi, which particularly struck me, mainly because I'm living half my time in Nairobi at the moment in Africa. I'm trying to develop neighboring Somalia, which a country of 9 million people you'd think would be relatively easy compared to a country such as yourself, which is 1.3 billion, some 200 times bigger if I've got my maths right. So I identified the stakeholders of an incident, and it came to some rather revealing conclusions. I won't go into that in great detail, but you can find that article on my website. People often ask me, where is CSR today around the world? And this graph gives you an idea of my first response. This graph actually is purely made up based on my instinct and my experience. As you can see, that Europe is pretty much a leader in corporate social responsibility. Germany, Scandinavian countries, my own country, the United Kingdom, are quite prominent in CSR and gone a long way down that path. The United States is catching up very, very rapidly, especially in the last year. And emerging markets are also starting to get the picture. I was recently in South America, and I can see that there a huge interest in corporate social responsibility. I was in the capital of Ecuador, which sits on the equator, and the mayor of Quito wanted to make Quito a socially responsible city, and to make it not the only one in South America, but to make all cities in South America socially responsible. Emerging markets, the biggest ones of course are your own, and neighboring China. There is a lot of analysis coming out of China on what's going on, but as you know, the biggest firms in China are state-operated enterprises, so highly government-owned. And also China, unlike you, is not a democracy. And I think a democracy is incredibly important to push these ideas future. And I do have a bias. I love coming to India because you have a democracy. You might criticize it, you might not be happy about it, there are all sorts of problems, but you have. China doesn't, and that worries me. It worries me a lot. I won't go into this slide, the evolution of CSR. I see I've already taken nearly 15 minutes. This gives an idea of the evolution of CSR, especially in the last 20 years. But you can trace back aspects of corporate social responsibility as early as the beginning of last century with Cadbury and the chocolate maker, Bourneville. You can even go back to the first company ever created over 2,000 years, which happened to be a Japanese company that made Buddhist temples. Many of you might know the name of it. And a lot of aspects of stakeholder treatment in a responsible manner were present in that company. Total CSR reporting output has exploded over the last years, and there are many more than we see now on this graph, but it gives you an idea of the rapid growth over time. Just to re-emphasize again the big difference between corporate social responsibility and previous ideas of the economic theory of the firm. On the left-hand side, you can see the economic theory of the firm, which is a huge focus on shareholders and shareholder benefits. And that has led to a very short-term perspective by companies. Companies have always been worried about their share price, and therefore most of their reports have been directed to very short-term issues. And CEOs generally, we have several with us, would admit that it's a nuisance working on these short-term things when everything takes over a much longer period of time. So they're welcoming CSR right across the world, and the stakeholder theory of the firm on the right. Just to re-emphasize our two initial speakers, Evita, who mentioned that the CSR is not the same as philanthropy, as this cartoon might point out. This is a little bit more complicated, and I'm going to get on to a little bit before I finish my remarks on 135. So before I get there, what are corporations doing on development? Generally, there are three types of work that they do. Type 1 is charitable or philanthropic donations to a good cause. Type 2, development is a direct byproduct of company actions, so merely by Unilever coming to India and employing people. And type 3, activities that promote sustainable development and anti-poverty initiatives, which I think is where we're heading, certainly in India, with 135. Adopting the stakeholder model of corporate social responsibility leads to a lot of positive impacts. I don't wish to see CSR develop into a whole set of new laws which become a drag on the company. The idea of CSR is to help society and at the same time for companies to make profits. Yes, I said that, to make profits. Nothing is wrong against making profits. Big question is how you make profits. So if a company is not profitable, it finishes, and history is littered with companies which are not socially responsible and are no longer with us. Enron, Lehman Brothers, to quote just two recent ones that you might even have forgotten about now, but were early victims and also culprits of the financial crisis in the West in the last 5 or 6 years. So one of the key aspects of CSR is reputation of a company. So basically CSR is raising the level and raising all boats, not just the old one. Anyone that gets a head start will become a leader and will become immensely profitable. Much easier, of course, if you're in financial services or software services like a Microsoft or a Google, who've got high ratings in terms of social responsibility. Much more difficult if you're an oil company like Shell or BP or a company such as Ford. All those companies, and we can discuss issues with them, all those companies rate very highly in terms of rankings. I won't go through all these points because I'm conscious of time, but CSR is certainly an important factor for employee motivation. A new area is the whole area of innovation and CSR leading to innovation, and there's a whole area called social entrepreneurship, which I'm sure speakers will be talking about here. And then the question of risk management and minimizing risk. Would, for example, the incident in the Gulf called deep water have happened if BP had better CSR? My oil friends say to me, Michael, there are probably 5,000 oil rigs in the sea, in the deep water seas, owned by British Petroleum. 1 out of 5,000 in 5 years, not bad. But we know the disaster from that. Let me just go to my last point, which was also almost my first point when I first worked in corporate social responsibility, was the growing consensus of a planetary bargain, whereby beggar thy neighbor policies of companies through using the cheapest labor, the most polluting industries and so on, are not in the interest of the companies concerned, nor their consumers. And we know the example of Bhopal in this country. Let me skip this one. So what more could companies do as I come to an end? Well, they could simply say that they focus on profit maximizations for their shareholders and claim that development is none of its business. Less and less these days. You can hardly find a large company saying that. It's different from medium-sized companies, different for small companies, different from micro companies, but there are frameworks and we do see progress in all those areas. Work on a partial approach, such as with the UN Global Compact, and support that process. A good thing in itself, like the Global Reporting Initiative, but sometimes one wonders, because these instruments developed by the Global Reporting Initiative and UN Global Compact have been developed by committees and countries. And as we all know, work that comes out of a committee is not always the best solution to problems. So this is an issue that we still need to, and political scientists need to still work on that issue. Third, and the one I like, is to engage fully with stakeholders and explore options for further developing efforts while ensuring that actions taken are fully in line with preserving shareholder value. Let me turn a little bit to CSR and Indian development. Certainly corporations are keenly aware and involved in development. And yes, many continue to exploit, and I quote the case of neighboring Bangladesh. But many see mutual benefits. Shell and security. One of my students is now head of security at the oil company Shell, based in The Hague. And she told me that 80% of security problems in Shell are above ground. You think about that for a minute. That means it's not to do with drilling underneath the ground, it's to do with above ground. And Shell is very active in Nigeria and elsewhere, dealing with communities, dealing with employees, dealing with local problems, dealing with climate, are all key issues these days. big issue of responsible sourcing. You can't these days export products which are based on polluting factories, which are destroying the environment, which are based on exploitation of labor practices, and so on. You know the story. Let me continue to the next slide. Let me tell you a story going back 40 years, when I left London to work at the Institute of Development Studies in the south of England on development issues. I found that everybody in the IDS were working on India. And I thought, I had never met anybody from India who wasn't smarter than me. So I decided to work elsewhere, worked in South America instead. So they've been inflicted by me. In India, I know these days many of you are very leading economists, and I happen to have met many times A.K. Sen and people of that nature. So a simple equation like this won't tax any of you, it taxes a lot of people. This is a standard Keynesian equation that output is equal to consumption plus investment plus exports minus imports. Now, we saw in the United States recently that public consumption was frozen, public